Hi everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we're carrying on with our series of videos looking at the major houses in Westeros, trying to go back through their history, dig up a little bit of their lore, and consider where they might be going in the rest of this story. Today we're looking at House Tully, which is one of those houses that often gets overlooked. They're at the center of things. Clearly they're at the center of things, but they're not one of the big houses that we're always talking about, the Starks and the Baratheons and the Targaryens and so on. So let's dig into it a little bit. Let's try and have a think about what might be the key storyline, the key thoughts we've got going on about House Tully. As always, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be framing this around questions that I've got from my patrons. I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can coming from the chat as we go through as well. Why don't we start, as we usually do, with just a little bit of the history, just to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as House Tully is concerned. So House Tully are a First Men house. Now, they're not one of the Andal houses. Actually, they came across with all of the First Men in that big invasion that came out through the south of Westeros and worked its way north. They obviously reached towards the north end of the Riverlands, and they established themselves as a major house. But unlike many of the ancient houses, and they are an ancient house, unlike many of the ancient houses that we know about, they never were kings of their area. They were never the biggest house or the most important house in their area. So whereas the Starks became the kings of the north, and then we get the kings of you get the Castlys, you get the kings of the I forget what they called themselves now, the Kings of the Rock, and you get all of these petty kingdoms that started out with hundreds of them, then moved down to 6 or 7 towards the end. House Tully never really were part of that. They were big, they were powerful, but they were never kings. Now, moving through time, they kept on being one of the most important houses in the Riverlands. And the Riverlands, out of all of the areas of Westeros, has always been the area that changes hands the most. So whereas the North, slowly the Starks took over and became the Kings of Winter, the Kings of the North. Dawn retained some kind of geographical integrity as well. The Riverlands ownership shifted from decade to decade, century to century, millennium to millennium. But the Tullys did survive. Many houses did not survive. The key turning point for the Tullys came with the invasion of House Targaryen. Now, at the time, the Tullys, they were there being vassals, one of the larger houses which were supportive of House Hoare, which were the kings of the Isles and the rivers. So they were in charge of the Iron Islands and also a chunk of the Riverlands. Now, what happened was that at that point, the Tullys, when they saw what was going on, they switched sides. They switched to the Targaryens. Crucially, this was just before Harrenhal, and Harrenhal was the death of Harren the Black, House Hoare, and that was the point at which the Targaryens then were looking around and said, "Who is it? Who can we trust to be in charge of this part of Westeros?" And they decided that they would go with the people who had turned to be by their side, and that is House Tully. Now, they were not the biggest, most powerful house in the area. They were not perhaps the one with the most gilded history. They were not the richest. They didn't have the biggest army. They, you could argue, didn't have the most defendable castle. Riverrun is a great castle. It looks fantastic, but there are other castles in the region that were equally, if not more impressive. Indeed, if you take Harrenhal, before it was destroyed, that was the most impressive castle in the entirety of Westeros. So they weren't anything hugely special. Big, powerful, but not the biggest or the most powerful. And what seems to have been the case is that they have then been loyal to the Targaryens through the next 300 years or so. We hear about Tullys who were in the small council. We hear that they were on the side of the Targaryens in the Blackfire Rebellion. We hear that they're being loyalists. There's engagements into the Targaryen family, things like that. So they retained their position, even if they did not have this kind of inbuilt loyalty from the other big houses in the Riverlands. And so what we've got a House Tully who the other houses in the area, the other houses in the Riverlands, the House Frey is the classic example, did not give them the respect that perhaps smaller houses in other parts of Westeros gave to the preeminent house in that area. So the Tullys just carried on as they were. They never really had a hugely strong and ferocious leader like, say, Tywin Lannister, who would sort of put down any opposition at all, but they just carried on as they were until the next key turning point, when they switched sides again, Robert's Rebellion. They joined in with this alliance against the Targaryens, which was with the Starks, with the Baratheons, with the Arryns, and then latterly, of course, with the Lannisters as well. They switched sides there. They tied themselves into it through marriage. Catelyn married into the Starks. Lysa married in to the Arryns, and that was how they assured their place in the world going forward. So that's where we're at. We had Hoster Tully was the Lord of the Tullys for a very long time. He dies right early on in the story that we have in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's, of course, succeeded by Edmure Tully, but the main characters we often think about with the Tullys aren't actually Tullys anymore. There's Catelyn and there's Lysa, and also Blackfish, the Blackfish, who is Brynden Tully, who was the brother of Hoster Tully, who is quite an enigmatic character. We'll come on to him a little bit more in just a moment. But he, rather than staying and serving with House Tully, when Lysa Tully goes over to the Vale of Arryn, and marries in there, he follows her on the way. So he leaves Riverrun. But he retains his identity, even though he is serving there. He retains his identity as a Tully. He's called the Blackfish, which is coming from this. He being told by Hoster that he's the black goat of the family, and he said, "Well, I'm a Tully. I can't be the black goat, but I can be the Blackfish." And so that's where he gets this from, and he has this. This is his sigil, the Blackfish. He sees it's like the equivalent of being a black sheep in the family. That's what he is embracing, being different, being not the person who toes the family line. Now, in terms of the house coming into the story where we're at, then, as we know, they weren't the most powerful family in the Riverlands. So the Freys then made their switch to be supporting the Lannisters. This was rewarded by the Lannisters saying, "Well, you're now in charge of the Riverlands." The Tullys obviously weren't allowing this. They weren't wishing to accept this as being the new status quo, and so they and some loyalist houses were holding out against the Lannisters for a long time. And what we see, most of the last bit of action we get with Jaime Lannister, is that he's going through the Riverlands with the Lannisters and just trying to get rid of the last vestiges of resistance by the Tullys. And so he goes to places like House Blackwood, and then he goes to Riverrun itself, breaks sieges, cuts some deals, and he does indeed get rid of the Tullys, perhaps not hugely successfully in the long term. We'll come back to that. But as it stands, the Tullys are no longer in control of Riverrun. They are no longer the lords of the Riverlands, except in their own eyes, and they are on the run. Edmure Tully is a captive of the Lannisters, and obviously the Blackfish is now gone missing. The garrison, which was at Riverrun, they had their weapons and armor taken from them, and they got chucked out of Riverrun. They're wandering around who knows where. So there's a lot of loose ends going on with House Tully at the moment, but they are not in a powerful position. Heather O'Connor Zamora, thank you so much for the super sticker. I very much appreciate that. I think I had one before we went on air from Ryan Larkin. Thank you very much. And I'm just double checking I haven't missed any other super chats while I was talking. No, I think that is me up to date there. But let's start with a question from one of my patrons, Catherine Furseth, who says, since House Tully was never the richest house, nor the house with the biggest army, how did they achieve becoming rulers of the Riverlands? Now, this is basically what I was. So I'll build on what I was saying before. They were loyal. They were loyal to the Targaryens. Now, House Targaryen, when they invaded, you have to think of it from their perspective. They didn't have any allies, really. They had the Baratheons, but that was pretty much it. So they then had to decide who are they going to have as lords in their area. And they basically made a decision. Aegon, perhaps his sisters, we're not 100% sure, that the decision was if a king bent the knee, then they could be allowed to stay on. Now, this is what happened with Torrhen Stark, for example. So the House Stark, they weren't allowed to remain kings, but they were unaffected. They were left there as they were effectively. What happened in the Riverlands was that the king at the time, Harrenhal, he didn't bend the knee, but some of his vassals, and the preeminent one here being the Tullys, switched sides. They saw these are dragons, let's not mess with them. They switched sides. And so when the Targaryens then had to look around and say, okay, the whores no longer are powerful enough to be in control here, clearly showed that they're not going to be loyal to us. Who is left? It has to be one of the major houses in the Riverlands. Who can we possibly have? The Tullys were the ones who showed loyalty, and so it was the Tullys who were rewarded with it. It was more important for the Targaryens initially to have in place the loyal people than the people who are necessarily the strongest or the most powerful. You can look down in the Reach, for example. Another example, the Tyrells were not the richest, most powerful and ancient family down in the Reach. That was the Hightowers, and yet they were made the Lords Paramount down there. It wasn't a matter of who is the most powerful person. We'll just make them in charge. This was a power play from the Targaryens to put their people in the most powerful position. So this was a matter of who did they think was going to be most loyal in the Riverlands. Catherine further then asks about why Hoster Tully changed his allegiance away from House Targaryen during Robert's Rebellion after centuries of support. And Anime Lover Nicole says, did the breaking of the betrothal between the Tully girl and Duncan the Small have anything to do with Hoster joining the rebellion? Okay, so there's a couple of layers here. The first is going back a few generations to the time of Aegon V. This is Egg, who we know from Dunk and Egg. When he was king, one of the things he wanted to do was get rid of this idea that the Targaryens only married their own. He had 4 children that he wanted to marry off for political reasons, to significant houses in Westeros. And one of these betrothals that were there was Celia Tully, who was the daughter of the Tullys, to Jaehaerys. It wasn't actually Duncan the Small, this was to Jaehaerys, who later became Jaehaerys II. All four of those betrothals in the end had to be called off. The Jaehaerys one with Celia Tully was because Jaehaerys decided he was going to marry his sister, and so they had to call that one off. Now, the one of these which caused the biggest political problem was indeed the one with Duncan the Small, who was the heir. He was married, or not married, but he was betrothed to a Baratheon, and that led to a short-lived rebellion that was put down by Duncan the Tall. Dunk, I suspect, if we get that far, then the Dunk and Egg stories will cover that, because that's quite a significant episode within Aegon V's reign. But obviously we get Celia Tully, therefore, is not married into the royal family. And given the fact that Duncan the Small he removed himself from the line of succession for the Targaryens, this actually meant that the Tullys were robbed of the opportunity to be having somebody who was Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. So perhaps that was a cause of some strife. We don't really read about that huge amounts, but it's entirely possible that's all lodged at the back of people's brains. The thing which does seem to have tipped the scales, though, was when we had Lysa Arryn engaged to Jaime Lannister. Now, this was going to be Hoster Tully was trying to get his two daughters to have the most politically advantageous marriages possible. Now, once you take Rhaegar Targaryen out of the equation, probably the next most eligible bachelor out there was Jaime Lannister, because not only was he the heir to Casterly Rock, but also Tywin Lannister was the statesman of his generation. He had been Hand of the King for many, many years. The Lannisters were obviously the richest family, so this was going to be a hugely advantageous match for the Tullys that got scuppered by Aerys II, the Mad King, deciding to make Jaime a member of the Kingsguard. Now, this annoyed absolutely everybody except for Jaime and Cersei, but it annoyed us so much that when we get the great tourney at Harrenhal, which is literally a matter of a few miles away from Riverrun, Hoster Tully did not go. He just boycotted it. So did Tywin Lannister, for that matter. They were incensed about what happened with this betrothal, which had been broken by the Mad King. So that clearly was the thing which broke this kind of bond of trust between Hoster and Aerys II, in particular Aerys II, not the Targaryens generally, I suspect, but with the king in particular. And when the Mad King topped all of that by murdering Brandon Stark, who was the man who had been engaged to his other daughter, again, it would have been a hugely important, politically important match for the Tullys, because Brandon was the heir to Winterfell. This appears to have been enough to push him the other way. I am sure Hoster Tully, he was many things, but he wasn't politically naive. I am sure that he would have looked around and thought, you know what, now finally there is a big enough rebellion for this to actually work. He didn't join in straight away. He waited until he saw what happened in the first year or so of the war. Once the forces were back together, Robert Baratheon had come up and joined with Ned Stark's army. Once the forces from the Vale were gathered together and they'd dealt with all the unrest in the Vale, once that whole army was together, once he'd established clear and good and strong links again for his daughters having 2 new marriages arranged with Ned Stark and with Jon Arryn, that was the point at which he then switched sides. So he needed to know that he was going to end up on the winning side, basically. But yes, he held a grudge with Aerys II. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Sylvester Snow, still talking about Robert's rebellion, Sylvester Snow says or asks, why did Hoster Tully not punish Walder Frey more severely than he did for arriving late to the Battle of the Trident? Unless I'm missing something, the only punishment for not obeying his liege lord was to earn the nickname the late Walder Frey, a small price to pay for being sketchy. Yes. So I think this shows the kind of disdain that the Freys had for the Tullys, that the Tullys called the Vanners and the Freys were just a little bit late. They just didn't get there in time for the big battle, which was the Battle of the Trident, and so they sort of, if you imagine the Frey army just turning up and going, oh, sorry, we missed the battle. That's the kind of feel that we've got. Now, I suspect what happened was that the Freys had all manner of incredibly reasonable reasons for not being there on time, and the fact of the matter is that they were a very strong house, and the Tullys simply did not have the strength, and frankly, after the war, probably the will to be punishing people who were still on their side. They weren't in open rebellion against the Tullys. They just showed them some disrespect. So I think that this was just a matter of the power dynamic. If the Freys had been a teeny tiny house, then I suspect that the Tullys would have just, yes, they would have punished them. But as it was, the Tullys seemed to have let the Freys just get on with being the Freys. Now, it's probably worth, as a little digression, just pointing out with the Freys, they were a lot later into this game than many houses, and their influence was based on the fact that they had this crossing over the river, which sort of dissects northern South Westeros, if that makes sense. So beneath the neck, but north of where the 3 forks turn into the Trident, over the river, you cannot cross it at all except for this one crossing, which is the Twins, this bridge. We see it when Robb Stark is trying to get across there, and the Freys are just messing around and sort of saying, we can't allow an army to be crossing over here, and they have to strike a deal and all the rest of it. That they did with everyone. It wasn't just Robb Stark. They weren't just being mean. They charged huge amounts of money for people to cross over there because they knew this was a good, at least an extra couple of weeks, if not more, travel time for people to go to a crossing much lower down the river and then go up the King's Road. So this is how they made their money, and they made their money by annoying people, but it made them, in their own small area, actually quite powerful. And so the Tullys, it probably didn't have the strength to be facing down one of their vassal houses. So that, I think, was what was going on there. Yes, they probably should have done more. And if they were in a stronger position, I suspect they would have done more. But no, because of the relative power between the two houses. Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super chat. That's very kind. I also got from you, I was going to get onto it in just one moment, super sticker just before we went on air, and you also left a super chat saying, just a show of thankfulness for all the excellent content on IDG and the marvelous stories on the well-told tale. I especially loved the story you read on Patreon of Rapunzel. Yes, that was a bonus story for patrons of the well-told tale. Appreciate all you do, and you are the best. Thank you so much, Mara. You know how much I appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed the story of Rapunzel. It's a great little story. This was the original Brothers Grimm story rather than the cartoony version that we're used to these days, so it's a little bit darker, but yeah, that was just a bonus for my patrons over on my second channel, which is where I do audio narrations of classic science fiction and fantasy stories. So thank you, Amara. I really do appreciate that. Eric Fogg says, any significance to Lewin? This is Maester Lewin serving at both Riverrun for Rob's birth and Winterfell. So Maester Lewin, who you'll remember from the first couple of books and the first couple of seasons of the show, he started out as Maester at Riverrun, and he was there for the birth of Rob. And then the agreement seems to have been that he went up when the war was finished, and once Rob was born, they took a little bit of time off, and then they headed up, they being Cat and baby Rob and Maester Lewin, all headed up to Winterfell. Now, when they got to Winterfell, we don't hear of the exact handover, but Lewin takes over as being Maester up at Winterfell. This presumably is connected with the death. Again, we're not told the details, the moving on, the passing on of Maester Wallace, who had been up at Winterfell before this. Now, in terms of the question, is there any significance in the fact that Lewin was in Riverrun and then moved up to Winterfell? I think it means that he's trusted by Cat. So as a story imperative, then it's definitely there. So he was trusted to be teaching all of the Stark children. And even more than a Maester who's just up in the north, he would have been teaching them from the perspective of the Seven Kingdoms. So the Starks had always been very focused up in the north, until the time of Rickard Stark, when they started looking down south. But then at the time of Ned Stark, all of the children, it's noticeable that yes, they're all Stark children, and they're there in the Godswood and all the rest of it, but they are being taught about the faith of the Seven. They understand about what's going on in the Seven Kingdoms, about knights and all the rest of it, to the extent that Sansa, at the very least, has these wonderful glowing ideals of knights and chivalry and things like that, in a way that we don't seem to see in the Starks at any point earlier on in this story, for going back hundreds, thousands of years. So that is probably the plot imperative for Maester Lewin being up there. It means that the Stark children are being taught by people from the south. There's also obviously Scepter, who comes up. This is almost certainly also a bit of what, if you read between the lines, is a bit of sort of overcompensation by Ned. He clearly, he brings up John, and he's got this baby John. He's got this invented story about, this is my bastard son, and all the rest of it, and he knows that this is going to be immediately putting his relationship with Cat on the back foot. So Cat had never met him before they got married. They had 2 weeks. She bore his child while he was off at war, and then she had to uproot herself and go up to Winterfell, where she knew absolutely no one. And it's a completely different climate, and this was hard on Cat. And Ned, he's a good man, and he will have been aware of the fact that this was hard, and he compounded that by immediately, when she arrived, he immediately, what in her view must have felt like humiliated her by bringing this bastard child, who he appears to have conceived sometime just after their wedding. So that's it. She will not have been happy, and he seems to have been almost overcompensating to try and make her feel welcome in the north. He builds a sept in Winterfell. This has never happened. This is in the north. They worship the old gods, but he allows this effectively a temple to foreign gods to be built in Winterfell. And he allows a scepter to be coming up to teach his children. He allows her maester to be coming up rather than him getting one that maybe he is more comfortable with. This is Ned bending over backwards to try and make Cat feel comfortable, people that she knows, things that she understands, and all the rest of it. So that, I think, is the taken as a whole, the plot imperative for Maester Luwin being there. I don't think the fact that he was a Tully loyalist is particularly important. I think that it's the fact that this shows where Ned's mind was at. Ronan Hagar, thank you so much, saying, I'm glad to finally make a live stream. Welcome. Welcome to anyone. If this is your first live stream, it's a very different experience to watching it back later. So welcome, Ronan, saying, apologies if this was already asked, but why was Brynden the Blackfish so opposed to marrying? We have got a question on that later, but I'll answer this one now. So, for those who don't know, Brynden Tully, Hoster Tully's brother, was supposed to get married. Hoster tried to arrange a marriage for him to a red wine, whose first name I can't remember off the top of my head. Now, he refused, and then he refused lots of other marriages, and then, as we've already said, when Lysa Tully goes, he sort of follows her, so he effectively quits the family, and being the black sheep or the blackfish of the family. And the question is, why? Why is he so against marriage? And the short answer is we do not know. George R. R. Martin hasn't told us, and he hasn't given us any specific hints on it either. There are options. Maybe he's gay. Maybe he just doesn't want to be married. It's that there's lots of possible options. I think that the question I've got coming later sort of sets out a possible reason, which I will answer when I get to that question. I've also heard some people speculating that perhaps he might have been obsessed with his brother's wife, Minisa. Possibly. It seems to be largely based on him at one point telling Cat that she had her mother's eyes or something like that. So yes, maybe. I think the fundamental point is we're not told, and I don't think it actually matters. What matters is that he doesn't want to get married. And that is where it is. I don't think it was about a specific person that he didn't want to get married to. It was just in general, he did not want to be married. And there are plenty of people in the world today who simply do not want to be married, and that is okay. And so I think that whereas, yes, it's more of an issue in that culture and all the rest of it, this I think is the way George R. R. Martin uses it is as a way to show us that he is his own person, and he's not just going to do something for the sake of doing it. He's not going to get married simply because it will be politically advantageous for his family. He is going to do what he wants to do, regardless of what the reason is. He is going to do what he wants to do, and that tells us about his character. So this is George R. R. Martin revealing his character without necessarily revealing all of the reasons for that, if that makes sense. Question from Cloaked One. Thank you so much. Saying, hi, Robert, long-time listener, first time making a live stream. Welcome to you as well. What do you think will happen to the Tullys by the end of the series? Will House Tully and Riverrun survive? Yes, of course, I've got questions on this one as well. I will answer this one here. I'll get into the specifics of the other questions later. I think the Tullys will survive. Obviously, Lysa's gone. Cat has gone. Lady Stoneheart's around, of course. That's a slightly different issue. I think the Blackfish will probably survive. I think Edmure will probably survive. I think that this is going to be one of the signs that things are starting to head back in the right direction, as it were, when the Tullys get back into Riverrun. So that's the one of the benchmarks. The Riverlands are always the epicenter in all through the history of the Seven Kingdoms. They're the epicenter of all of these great civil wars, all focused around what's going on in the Riverlands. So what's going to happen at the end? I think Riverrun will survive. I think that they will survive with Edmure. I don't think George R. R. Martin is, as is the case with many of us, I suspect, is that excited by Edmure as a person, but I think it's very much in his style that it's not just the charismatic, wonderful, interesting people who survive. Sometimes it's just the okay people. And so I think that Edmure will be one of those people who makes it through to the other side. He will be changed by what has happened to him, undoubtedly. So hopefully we're going to see a better side of Edmure in the last couple of books. But I think that he will end up being the Lord Protector of the Riverlands, or whatever the official title is there. Let's go to a question from where did we get to? Oh, Eric Ferg saying, do you think Jon Arryn is actually the father of Robert Arryn, or is Robert a product of the Peter Baelish affairs? Now, this is a perennial question. So we know Robert Arryn, Sweet Robin, the only child of Jon Arryn and Lysa Arryn, who was Lysa Tully. We know that Lysa Arryn was madly in love with Littlefinger. We also know that all the hints are there that they will have been having I'll call it an on-off affair. I think that it was always on, but they weren't always in the same place for many years, basically ever since they were at Riverrun. Now, the question is whether or not Robert Arryn is therefore Littlefinger's child. And George R. R. Martin deliberately leaves this one a bit vague, I think. He allows us this idea that maybe he is. The closest we get is this to kind of an understanding or a hint about this is when we get Lysa Arryn saying to Littlefinger, after Jon Arryn's dead and Littlefinger's going to marry her, and he says, let's get married at the Eyrie, and she says, no, let's do it here, and they have these conversations, and this is all from Sansa's perspective, because of course this is exactly the kind of conversation she wishes to be listening in on, but then Lysa says, I can't wait to be making another child with you. Now, this is an interesting phrase. Another child. Is that because they already have a child? Or is that because she remembers all the way back many, many years ago when she did become pregnant with Littlefinger's child way back when they were in Riverrun before she'd been married, and she'd been forced by her father, Hoster, to drink some moon tea and lose that baby. So is she remembering that? It is not clear. George R. R. Martin is trying to make this unclear for us. If I had to guess, it would be no, for the simple reason that when we see Littlefinger, he doesn't. If this was actually his child, I suspect that he would be treating him in a very different way from the way that he is, which is sort of like a tool at the moment. I don't think he shows absolutely no sign of caring for Robert Arryn in any way, shape, or form. He just sees him as perhaps a mechanism for himself to get into power. And I don't think that would be the case if he actually thought that this was his child. You can try and work out whether they were together at the right time, and I think the answer is probably not, but we couldn't be 100% sure, so my guess is probably no, but George R. R. Martin has left it particularly vague. We don't have journals for them where they were at specific times to be able to say whether it's possible or not. Googly Woogly, love saying that name. Thank you so much for the super chat saying, if the Tullys were such big Targaryen supporters, will they throw in for Daenerys or Fagon right away? Cheers. Interesting question. So they were, but I don't think it was through them being particular loyalists to the Valyrians. I think it was a recognition that the Targaryens were the most important, powerful family, and so when Robert's Rebellion happened, they were happy to switch sides. It wasn't that they were loyal to the last. There were plenty of families who were loyal to the last of the Targaryens, but the Tullys were not one of them. So will they support Fagon? No, I do not think so. I think that from at the moment, the Tullys are now very, very much tied in with the North. This is because we have to ask who is going to be on their side. They are scattered to the four winds at the moment, the Tullys. Who is going to be on their side? Well, we have the Blackfish, who is there, probably fronting up House Tully for a while. Effectively, he's got connections across to the Vale. The Vale, I suspect, will be heading to the north in a bit because Littlefinger is going to be trying to put Sansa right up there as potential Stark heir. We get Lady Stoneheart, who is a Tully by birth, but she is very much there looking out for the Starks, obviously, because she's now also a Stark. So I think that they're going to be looking northwards rather than southwards. So that I don't think they're going to be particularly recognizing any kings. Are certainly not going to be recognizing the Lannisters. Yes, they might be vaguely supportive of somebody who kicks the Lannisters out, but I think that they've got bigger issues themselves, as in the fact that they're currently without a home. And Edmure is captured. So this is not really going to be a huge issue for them. They are, once the whole thing is ended, then they will try and figure out what's going on, and I suspect at that point then Edmure will be back in control, and he is the one who is going to be there thinking, who do I owe a favor to? It's actually House Stark. It's not anyone from the south. So I think the short answer is I don't think they're going to care huge amounts about what's happening down the south, that they're going to be looking to the north. Question from Mara Lee saying, House Tully's words are family, duty, honor. Did they ever own a Valyrian steel sword? If so, who has it and where did it go? this is one of those things where we're not told, but the clear implication is no, because if they did have it, then surely it will have been with Hoster, with Edmure, maybe the Blackfish. Someone will have had it, but we don't hear of it. Therefore, we clearly have to assume that they don't. And this is not a huge surprise. The houses that had them had to have been at least rich 100 years before the Targaryen invasion. And as we've already established, the Tullys were not one of the major houses in the Riverlands then, which means that they definitely weren't one of the major houses in Westeros at that point. They did not have the money to be getting themselves a Valyrian steel sword. So no, they didn't. And I think this is an indication of their status going back in time. Eric Fogg asks, how much knowing culpability did Lysa have in the near extinction of houses Tully and Stark? Interesting question. So in terms of the near extinction of House Tully, was she aware of the what was going on with the Red Wedding? Probably not. Was she aware of well, I think that's really it in terms of the near extinction of House Tully. House Tully was not huge. In terms of House Stark, she's not really been involved in what happened up in the north with what people think happened with Brandon and Rickon, so she hasn't been involved in that at all. Obviously, she wasn't down in King's Landing at the time when Sansa and Arya went missing. So, no, she did know all about Littlefinger's schemes and plans. Well, probably not all about them, but she did know a lot about that. She knew about the assassination of Jon Arryn. She knew that this was all about setting the Starks and the Lannisters against each other. So she is by no means innocent in this. She is very complicit in it because of her great love for Littlefinger. I don't think she thought for 1 second that this was about getting rid of House Tully or House Stark. I think that it was just the, how do I help the man that I love? Cam, thank you. Just saying thanks for all your great content. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's very kind. Lady Eternal saying, hello, Robert. This is the first live stream since I became a patron. Well, welcome. Straight away as a patron, immediately in with the questions. Love it. I saw a theory recently that the Red Wines were Blackfire supporters during the rebellions, or at least were sympathizers. This is coming back to the Blackfish issue. Why didn't he marry? The Red Wines, for those who need a bit of a reminder, they are a family down in the Reach. They are quite a rich and powerful family. They have got an impressively large navy. I saw a theory recently that the Red Wines were Blackfire supporters or sympathizers. Part of the discussion was that Hoster Tully and the Blackfish fell out in the books because Hoster had arranged for the Blackfish to marry Bethany Redwine, with alternatives being a Bracken or a Frey, and Blackfish had refused all offers. The reason for the refusal was, was theorized as being that he was not only named after Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, but he'd squired with House Darry, who supported the Targaryens and fought with the forces opposed to the Blackfires. Do you find the theory that the fallout between the Tully brothers was based on Hoster arranging marriages to families that supported or were suspected of supporting the Blackfires credible? Okay, so I said we would come to one of the theories about why the Blackfish didn't marry, and I've not seen this fully worked through theory, so I can just go on what you've given me here. The Blackfish clearly was fighting for the Targaryens, and he was betrothed to, or Hoster tried to get him betrothed to a red wine, and then also a couple of others. Now the others being the Brackens and the Freys. Now, neither of them perhaps were people that you would want to be married into. I don't think that there is evidence that this was a matter of who is loyal to the Targaryens and who is loyal to the Blackfires. That doesn't seem to be a thing which is there. I mean, it would tie in potentially with the Vagon attack if it did, but there's no. That George R. R. Martin doesn't provide us with these additional hints. I don't think that this is the case. It's just people looking to see, well, what might be the reason here. I think it's, if you take Occam's razor, the simplest solution is obviously the right one. The simplest solution is simply that he just didn't want to marry. And it wasn't about a political position. He doesn't seem to be about striking a particular political position. It's just about who he wants to be as a person, what he wants the freedom to be able to do. He doesn't seem to be so loyal to the Tully cause that he has to do what he's told by his brother, or even stay in Riverrun. So he basically does seem to be doing what he wants to do, and this is the kind of person who does not necessarily want to marry the people that he's told he has to marry. So that's my take on it. I'll be interested to read the fully worked through theory, but I don't think we've had the evidence to suggest that it's anything more than just he didn't want to get married. Lawnduck 20 says, "Hi Robert, do you think Edmure knows about Lady Stoneheart? After taking him down from the gallows, it's hinted that the singer Jamie leaves to sing the Reigns of Castamere is Tom O'Sevens of the Brotherhood. Do you think he told Edmure about Cat?" So yes, this is Tom O'Sevens of the Brotherhood. So Tom O'Sevens is he's a minstrel. Jamie gets him to be playing the Reigns of Castamere. This is basically it's a big threat that, you know, if you don't do as you're told, then this is what the Lannisters do. We covered it last week when we were looking at House Lannister, but basically they completely decimated House Rain, and so playing this song is just their calling card to say this is what we do to people who oppose us. Now, Tom O'Sevens, basically after the siege of Riverrun is broken, he says, "I'm going to stay here," you know, and Jamie says, "Fine." So he, but he is connected with the Brotherhood without banners. So the question is, might he have told Edmure that Lady Stoneheart lives? He may have done. We don't get any hint of this. There's no particular change in what Edmure's behavior that we're aware of. I think the importance of Tom O'Sevens, though, is that suddenly the Brotherhood without banners have got somebody on the inside in Riverrun, because otherwise the people who are trying to retake the castle, and they will try to retake the castle, we know that they've got a very small garrison now there, the Freys and Lannisters, they wouldn't have anyone inside, and it's a lot easier to take a castle if you have someone on the inside. So I think that's what's going on, is that when the castle is retaken, it's because Tom O'Sevens lets people in rather than any other reason. Maybe he told him about Lady Stoneheart, but it's hard to see what the advantage of that would be, because Edmure is the kind of person who might blab that he knows it, and then people might ask, where did you find this out from? And then it would get back, it was Tom O'Sevens. So I suspect that Tom O'Sevens probably kept that information to himself. Cloaked One, thank you again for the super chat, saying, "Thanks for answering my last question. If Brynden had married, would the outcome of Robert's rebellion have changed? Also, the outcome of Robb Stark's rebellion?" So if he had married, would it have changed Robert's rebellion? I don't think it would have done. He's he's an indomitable fighter and all the rest of it, but he's on the side of Robert's rebellion regardless, basically. So I think that no, I don't think that would have affected anything. In terms of Robb Stark's rebellion, he was back with Robb Stark during this, and so he was on his side. Now, he was one of his key advisors. You see that there's a great scene, obviously, when he's telling off, and Robb Stark as well, telling off Edmure Tully for being rash and attacking somewhere where he shouldn't have been attacking, not understanding what the strategy is, and all the rest of it. So the question is, if he had married, would that have made a difference? And I think the answer is no. If he'd been marrying somebody, particularly if he'd been marrying one of the people who owed allegiance to House Tully anyway, then no, he would just be in exactly the same position. He's clearly somebody who does, despite him being this loner and independent person, he does have very strong links to House Tully, and he's not just abandoned them, he has come back and protecting the castle and all the rest of it. So I don't think it will make any difference. He is the kind of person who would always going to be standing by Robb Stark's side, regardless of if he had married. Question from Jared saying, "Hi Robert, when the subject of the Tullys comes up, I often wonder about the significance of Kat's children's resemblance to her family instead of the Starks. Only Arya seems to bear resemblance to her father's side of the family, while Robb, Sansa, Bran and Rickon Stark all look like Tullys. If these children take after the Tully side, does that mean anything about the characters other than their appearance?" Yeah, this is really interesting. They all do. They're called. I mean, it wasn't on the show. We always imagine characters as they are on the show, but in the books, then it's not just Sansa who's got the red hair, but a lot of them. Robb Stark looks more like a Tully. It's noted, and I think that probably this is just George R. R. Martin. He makes a lot of you can tell where people come from because of the way they look, more than perhaps we would in our world we would necessarily think. But it's that, if you've got these features, then you must be from that family. And so I think that this is him very clearly. The two members of that Stark family who look like Starks are Arya Stark, who we're told looks like Lyanna. We're told this several times. So that is something which is very clear there. And Jon Snow. So it's almost as if we're being invited to make this connection between Arya and Lyanna and then Jon, because they share this set of features. And we shouldn't assume that it's from Ned Stark. This comes from Lyanna, who looks like a Stark, very much like a Stark. So that, I think, is what is going on as much as anything else. And the other Stark children, does this make them more Tully-like? Well, clearly with Sansa, this is something that she does appear very much to be very Tully-like. But the others, no. Rickon very much comes across as being almost feral, is the word we often associate with him, but he's very northern. Bran clearly very tied in with the northern magic and all the rest of it. Robb Stark he's his father's son, but he clearly has a very strong bond with his mother. We see that all through the Catelyn chapters in book 1 and book 2. The link is very clearly shown there, that he is like his mother and he has got a connection with his mother. But I think, as I said, more to the point, is not so much to show that they are like Tullys, but to show that the others are Starkish, and to be drawing that link in between Arya and Lyanna and then Jon. So that's what I think is happening there. At which point, about halfway through my live streams, I always let you know stuff that's going on with this channel. I mentioned my second channel. If you don't know my second channel, it's called The Well-Told Tale. That's where I'm passionate about classic science fiction and fantasy stories. And I audio narrate what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever. So if you love audiobooks, then do go and check that out. There's a link down in the description. We've just finished a classic science fiction story called Death World, and we've got a whole load of other stuff there. Frankenstein, Call of Cthulhu, War of the Worlds, things like that. They're absolute classics. So if you're interested, please do go and check that out. In terms of other things you might be interested in, the Lord of the Rings content is carrying on. I've got a video coming, my next video coming out on that, I think, on Monday, will be about the Blue Wizards. If you've ever wondered what happened to the Blue Wizards, we know about Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown. Well, there were 2 Blue Wizards in that order as well. What happened to them? They clearly would have been hugely powerful wizards, and Tolkien says that they were hugely influential. But doing what? So if you're interested in that, then do keep an eye out for that one. And the other thing I always say is patrons, thank you. I genuinely can't do what I do without you. If you want to support this channel, the best way to do that is by being a patron. As a patron at different levels, you also get different sets of benefits. All patrons get priority questions for live streams, but $5, for example, you get access to all of the audio I produce for this channel. $10, you get your name down in the description, and also you get a chance to influence the content that I create on this channel, with a regular chance to vote on future content, stuff like that. If you're interested in that, then there's a link down in the description. But let's get back to the questions. Sasa K says, "Hi, Robert. Hoster Tully. I know a lot of people love to hate his children, just a bit, but over time I've come to just blame him. Do you agree that many things in the current story could be considered at least partially his fault? For example, so many things with Littlefinger. I realised he wasn't exactly going to give notice that his ward was pining so hard for his eldest, nor would he have been able to keep Lysa from falling for Peter. But perhaps if he had seen his children as more than political bargaining pieces and as actual people, some of the issues could have been avoided. Granted, that's how most leaders of great houses saw their kids, so who knows. Another example would be how he seemed not to prepare Edmure to lead at all, even though he was his only son." Yeah, so Hoster's one of those characters that it's hard to love him, I think, as a character. He clearly was a political maneuver player and was looking to get the best possible family links across to other great families and all the rest of it. I suspect that he was very aware that the Tullys weren't as powerful as some of the other great families and was wanting to tie them in. Now, so I think we can probably forgive him for trying to get politically advantageous marriages for his children, in the sense that everybody was trying to do that at the time. How Edmure turned out, he was worse on the show than he is in the books, but still on the books he's not a particularly impressive leader in waiting or leader, and we don't hear much about what Hoster did to prepare him. We are told that all of the children would by default go to the Blackfish, their uncle Brynden, rather than their father, which probably tells you a lot about what the two people were like. That Hoster was not the person that you would go to if you wanted to share, if you wanted to show any sign of weakness, or if you wanted a little bit of support or something. That wasn't what he was about. Brynden the Blackfish appears to have been able to sort of come alongside them and encourage them and all the rest of it. Even with Littlefinger, incidentally, Littlefinger looked up to him hugely. So, yes, I entirely endorse this idea that he probably could have done a better job. We don't get many very positive male role model fathers, it has to be said, in this series. So I don't think we can single him out as being any worse than others. Certainly, you think of Tywin, or you might think of Roose Bolton, or whoever. These are not great figures that we can be looking up to. So, yes, I would agree. You can apportion quite a bit of the blame for what happened to him, but I don't think that means that it's quite a low bar. But according to the standards of the day, I don't think that he was any worse than his peers. So that's it. I think I don't particularly like him as a character, and we also only meet him as he's a very old man, so he doesn't come across particularly well. Question from Lawnduck20. Do you see the Blackfish meeting up with his niece? This is Lady Stoneheart. And Stacey Burke also asks, assuming the Blackfish shows up in Winds, how do you think he'll react to Lady Stoneheart? Well, I think he definitely will. I think that he's almost certainly... So, for those who are unsure about what's going on, basically, the way that Jaime won the siege of Riverrun was that whereas the Freys had basically been threatening to kill Edmure and then not going through with it, what he did was he got Edmure and then threatened his wife and child and said, go in there and hand over the castle to me. And Edmure did indeed go in there and hand over the castle to Jaime. And so Jaime did get the castle without having to actually shed any blood, which is very impressive when you think about it. But Edmure let his uncle Brynden escape. And so the Blackfish did escape. Blackfish had been leading the garrison, defending Riverrun all this time. He allowed him to escape, and this was clearly not good because he was a very able political leader and military leader, and the kind of person that forces would rally behind in the Riverlands. Now, having captured Riverrun, he then releases the 200 Tully soldiers out into the wild. He takes their swords and armor off of them, and he then sends them off. Almost certainly, I think that the Blackfish will find them, and he will then effectively form his own mini army with the intention of retaking Riverrun. So I think that is where he is going to go. I think the actual retaking of it probably will be through Tomo 7s via the Brotherhood Without Banners. But will the Blackfish meet his sister, Lady Stoneheart? Entirely possibly. There are so many groups in the Riverlands in this season, or the section of the books, that it's any of them could meet any of the other ones. So it is entirely possible. If he does, what will he think? It's very hard to say, but also it's hard for him to sympathize, I suspect. Yes, he will understand this desire to get revenge on the enemies of the Starks, but at the same time, he will see that this isn't his sister, and the people who are gathered around her at the moment didn't know her as she was, and he will be the person to say, you're not who you used to be. So maybe that's and Jaime will also be able to do that, but not with the same way that her own uncle will. So I think that this is with Lady Stoneheart, what we're going to see is this journey for her to reach this point at which what is keeping her there is no longer working. So it's the equivalent. If you think of the classic idea of the ghost who's clinging on to life in the world because they've got some grievance, something that they need to settle, some before their roving spirit can be released or whatever it is. That's the kind of feel we have with Lady Stoneheart, I think, is that she is there, she is wanting to get revenge for all of the ills done to her family. She believes that her two sons, Bran and Rickon, are dead. She thinks that Arya is lost. She thinks that Sansa has been forcibly married to the Lannisters and is now missing. She has this whole series of wrongs that she needs to right. And her arc, such as it is, has to take her to the point where she feels as if that is all done. And that will be done once the Freys are dealt with, once the Lannisters in some way are dealt with, and once she discovers that actually the 4 children that she fears are all dead are actually all alive. And one of the staging posts on this, I suspect, is for someone like the Blackfish to be pointing out what she is like to her, and for her to be having some kind of self-realization. There's not much of her left, but she has to reach that point, and I think that meeting the Blackfish is going to be a staging post on that kind of slow march of character development. Mara Lee saying, do you have any ideas where the Blackfish may be hiding? Will we see him again in the last books? And if so, what role will he play, if any, in either the battle with the others or King's Landing? So where he's hiding is in the Riverlands, and there's lots of places to hide in the Riverlands. So I think that we will see him joining up with the army, the garrison from Riverrun. In terms of will he play a role in the battle with the others or King's Landing, I don't think with King's Landing. With the others, again, I think probably not. I think his role is to be heading up the retaking of the Riverlands for ordered forces, if that makes sense. There's lots of groups going on around at the moment. There's the Brotherhood Without Banners. There's the breakaways from the Brotherhood Without Banners. There's breakaways from the Brave Companions. There's Nymeria's Super Wolf Pack. I mean, there's lots of groups going on around in the Riverlands right now. In order to return it to some form of order, it doesn't just have lots of these groups going around there. You do need, I think, to have the equivalent of the Tullys in Riverrun, who are respected by the majority of these groups around and about. And that, I think, will require him. I suspect that Edmure may well, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, but he may well end up just being a prisoner of the Lannisters all this time and only get released right at the very end. Who knows? But I think the Blackfish is going to be the one who is the focus of House Tully, which means that he's probably going to be staying in Riverrun and the Riverlands, and the battle with the others will possibly come all the way down to the Trident, at which point he may well get involved. But I don't think he's going all the way up to the war. Stephen Dillon says, the last time I saw Lady Stoneheart, she had Robb's bronze iron crown. What do you think she plans on doing with it? Do you think she plans on crowning Jon in accordance with Robb's last wishes? That doesn't really seem like something she'd do. Especially since she's been asking about the Hound, probably indicating she's still looking for her kids. Since last anyone or the Brotherhood saw, Arya was with the Hound. Also, how much of Catelyn is still under Lady Stoneheart? It didn't seem like Catelyn to go after Brienne like she did, but it also doesn't seem like Stoneheart to be looking for Arya like she is. So Lady Stoneheart is after revenge, but she's also about putting things right, as it were. She needs there to be a Stark ruling in Winterfell. That's what's going on. This is why she's playing with this crown. This is why she's looking for her children. That's what's going on. Now, the fact, well, let me take a step back, because this thought occurred to me that when I was recording, as I did last week, I released it only yesterday, but the Learned Hands podcast, if you've never come across them, a couple of real-life lawyers who do a podcast about law in Westeros. And I had a fantastic conversation with them about a few legal issues in A Song of Ice and Fire, including Robb's will. What are the implications of that? And a lot of it depends on exactly what it says that we don't know about. And various other issues. And following on from that, I reflected on the fact that Robb's will, it's entirely possible Robb's will legitimize Jon and say that Jon should be the Lord of Winterfell. The exact wording we're not entirely sure about, but that's very likely what it's going to say. Now, Robb did that because he thought that Bran and Rickon were dead, Arya was missing, and Sansa had just been married into the Lannister family, so she couldn't possibly be made in charge of Winterfell, the Lady of Winterfell. So who's left? Well, I'll legitimize Jon, and he can be Lord of Winterfell. That was his thinking. So we have a document from the last undisputed Lord of Winterfell, King of the North, that says Jon Snow should be the new Lord of Winterfell. However, there are other claimants. The Manderleys have sent Davos to get Rickon, because in their mind, he is the new lawful king of the North, the next Lord of Winterfell. Bran has gone north of the Wall. They have no idea where he's gone, when he's coming back. Rickon, they know where he is. So they are going to try and get him and have him as the Stark figurehead. So we have Jon, we have Rickon. Littlefinger is almost certainly going to be seeing an opportunity for Sansa to be the new Lady of Winterfell. And so he's almost certainly going to be heading up there, trying to put her in a position to claim to be Lady of Winterfell. Bran, when he arrives back, is technically the Stark heir. He is the next eldest son after Robb, so he also, when he turns up, he will have a legitimate claim to Winterfell as well. And Lady Stoneheart, out of all of the her children, the one that she thinks that she can find is Arya, and she's got this crown, and I think what she's now wanting to do is find Arya so that she can crown her the Stark heir. So actually what we're going to be faced with in a delicious situation, we always talk about this Targaryen succession crisis. We're going to have a Stark succession crisis, because we're going to have Jon, who's got his sympathizers, and he's got a letter. He's named in Robb's will as being the new lord. We've got Bran, who Robb had assumed was dead, but actually is technically the next successor. We've got Rickon, who the Manderleys are touting as being the next successor. We've got Sansa, who Littlefinger is trying to make the next successor. And then perhaps we've even got Arya, that Lady Stoneheart is going to try and crown. So we are going to get all of the Stark children having claims to Winterfell, which is mind-blowing when you think about it, but that is almost certainly where this is going. And this is why Lady Stoneheart has been playing with that crown, because she is thinking, who is it that she can crown? Which Stark child, which of her children can she find and get to them back claiming what is rightfully theirs? Because it's not just the phrase she's got a grudge against, it's also Theon for taking, and then the Boltons obviously for taking Winterfell away from them. reflective rambling for Christoph Dane. Thank you so much. I love it when people do this, picking up on questions from other people in the chat. That's really kind of you. Saying, could the Tullys or the Starks stake a claim on Erie when and if Robert Arryn and Harry the Heir die? Could the Freys try and claim it through Roslyn? Right, so Roslyn is the daughter of Walder Frey, who married Edmure Tully. So she's now a Tully. Now, in terms of who is that, there's always an heir after there's always a next in line. Harry the Heir is the after Robert Arryn. Then Harry the Heir is rather obscure. You have to go back through the family tree of the Arryns, but he is the next in line. Now, could the Starks stake a claim for the Eyrie? I mean, if so, it would presumably be through the fact that Lysa Arryn was sister of Catelyn. It's a bit tenuous, to be honest. They don't really have a claim for it. Could the Tullys? Again, not really, I don't think. But we're at the point with not just the Arryns, but many of the noble houses, where so many members of them have been killed, that it's now a matter of, okay, so if the other people, if the next two people, if Robert Arryn and Harry the Heir both die, who is next? It's actually probably whoever has got the most power will put their person there. Might is right in Westeros. Whenever you get into these legal technicalities, it's not actually just a matter of who is the next in line. It's a matter of who has got the strength to claim it. Robert Baratheon was not the heir to the Iron Throne. Viserys was the heir to the Iron Throne, or if we assume that all of the other children were killed. So he claimed it because he had the strength to do so. He then said, yes, actually, I'm a little bit Targaryen. If you trace my family tree back up a little bit and back down again, you'll see that technically I am in the line of succession. But he wasn't next in line to the throne by any stretch of the imagination. So he claimed it by strength, and that is almost certainly what would happen. There would be a power vacuum if both of those two people died, and whoever had the most power would probably then put their preferred candidate there. And in the absence of anything else going on, the Vale of Arryn is actually quite enclosed. It's got mountains going cutting across both sides of it, and then there's only one major port, Gulltown, and so when winter comes, it is pretty much shut off to the outside world, and winter is, as we know, just coming. So if they do not make it out, then whoever's in there will be in prime position to say who the Lord is, and possession is 9/10 of the law. So could they? Well, yes, they wouldn't have a particularly strong claim to it, but really it's a matter of who's in position there, particularly when winter comes in, who can claim it while winter's on before anyone else can get in there. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Question from Bride of Fire saying, hi Robert, since we have some idea that the prologue of the Winds of Winter will show Jane Westerling and a probably rescue attempt, who do you think will do it? Lady Stoneheart, Blackfish, Super Wolfpack, or Jaime and Brienne? Okay, so we have some idea about the prologue, in that George Martin has said that Jane Westerling, who was Robb Stark's widow, will appear in the prologue. That doesn't mean it's going to be from her point of view, but she will be in the prologue. Now, she is being transported or about to be transported across to the Westlands. Now, why would she be, given that the timing of this has to be quite early on, why would she have a chapter there? The most logical, we don't know this, but I've suspected it for a while, because the most logical reason why is because the prologue is going to be a rescue attempt on that train that's going to be taking her to the Westlands. And the prologues are important because they George R. Martin uses them to frame the rest of the book. Now, what would best frame the rest of the book? I think it's not just a random group of people doing this. I think it's going to have to be something that shows some important points going forward. Now, could it be the Blackfish and the garrison from Riverrun? Possibly, but I think that they will be more likely to be focused in on trying to regain Riverrun. Could it be Lady Stoneheart and the Brotherhood without banners? Again, possibly, but her focus appears to be at the moment on dealing with Jaime and Brienne and trying to find her daughter Arya, which leaves me with the thought that it might be Nymeria's super PAC. Now, why might this be the case? Well, we have had already hints that the super PAC are doing things, and they are acting more and more intelligently in attacking the people that they should be attacking. The Freys, we hear about them attacking some of the Freys, wagon trains, and the rest of it. And the chapter that we have got for Arya from the Winds of Winter, it's the Mercy chapter. It opens, if you read the first paragraph, it opens with her awaking from a dream and still being able to taste blood in her mouth, which implies that she's had another wolf dream. What is it? Nymeria has clearly been leading another attack somewhere. The clear implication for me is that is what we're going to see in the prologue. This would also frame what is happening in the book as a whole, because it's framing what's happening with lots of different things. It's framing what's happening with Arya regaining or retaining her Stark identity, which is going to be a lot of her character arc. It's about what's going on in the Riverlands. It will show that this is the start of the fight back against the Freys and the Lannisters in the Riverlands. It's going to be showing also the importance of somebody a Stark walking into a wolf, which is exactly what is going to be happening with Jon, I suspect, at the beginning of this story as well. So all of this, I think, ties in for me to the idea that this is what, I mean, having said this is almost the first thing people will read when they pick up the book whenever it comes out, and it'd be very easy for this to be, that's a thing that Robert got wrong straight away. But it makes most sense to me if this is the Nymeria's wolf pack, and that is the prologue that we're going to get. And it will probably be just from some random guy who's there escorting Jane Westerling and being sent off, and then the wolf pack coming in. And I think that will make for an amazing start to the Winds of Winter, if we actually see the snow coming in, and then through the snow the wolves. That would be astonishing. I think really good. Mr. E. Knight, thank you for the super chat, saying, if Jane Westerling, as we're talking about Jane Westerling, lives and her parents or the Lannisters don't force Moon Tea, it would be cool if Edmure splits with the Frey wife and marries Jane to raise Rob's child and his niece or nephew as his own. Yeah, interesting idea. So I think that she has been forced to be drinking Moon Tea. So Jane Westerling's mother had been in with the Freys all along, and she'd been making sure that Jane Westerling pregnant. That is what is his backstory, and she basically sold her off to the Lannisters. Now, because she's a Westerling, she comes from the Lannister lands. Let's not forget. Now, so I don't think they're going to have I don't think she's going to have a child. I don't think she's going to have Robb Stark's child. If she did, yeah, it would be nice and good and a happy story. I think if Edmure did then sort of cast aside his current wife and then marry her and raise Robb Stark's child, but at the same time that then makes Edmure abandon a woman who is probably entirely innocent, or if not entirely innocent, then largely innocent of the Frey's crimes. She seems to have been aware of the Red Wedding plans beforehand, but had not approved of them. And of course, his child. So I don't think that we're going to see that happen. I mean, it's a nice idea, but I don't think that that's what's going to happen. Question from Mara Lee, saying, what do you see happening to Edmure Tully in the last 2 books? And Persephone says, does Edmure now get Riverrun and the twins? Thank you for everything you do for us. Well, you're very welcome. So I think he's going to remain a prisoner of the Lannisters for a little while. I think that they will use him for political capital for a long time. Maybe he will get released, maybe he'll be rescued, but I don't think he's going to be the priority here. In terms of where he ends up with, I think in the end he will end up in Riverrun. I think the Blackfish will be holding it for a long time, but in the end he will get it. The twins, no. The twins, it was one of the things in the show that I actually really liked, and I felt I shouldn't like, but I did really like, was this idea of Bronn being given a castle. That was just it just really appealed to me, and him saying, how do you outbid one castle? 2 castles, and that's the twins. So I loved that idea. That obviously that he went to inherit Highgarden there. I don't think that's going to happen in the books, but because he was a much bigger character on the show than the books. But if he does play a bigger role, which is possible, then the idea of him getting that is there. But I think that's just my fanciful soul, to be honest. Edmure would not get both. He would be the Lord of Riverrun, and then it would be a matter of finding somebody else. I think that the massacre at the twins is going to happen in the books, but I think that this will happen. It will be Lady Stoneheart who does it rather than Arya. That's just my gut instinct. She's very much more focused in on these than Arya has been. So I think that the Frey massacre will happen, and the Freys effectively will be kicked out, and it's a matter of who gets it at the end. And maybe we won't even be told who gets it at the end, but it's a matter of appointing a new and important house to there. So it's a matter of rewarding somebody for what they've done in the in the wars to come. So that's the that's the situation. It's not going to be Edmure Tully's, but it will be in Edmure Tully's gift to give it to somebody that he wishes to reward. Yeah, Andrew K. The twins made more sense than getting Highgarden and being Master of Coin when he already admitted he did not understand money lending on the show. Yeah, absolutely. So they kept on the show. I'm not going to digress into the show too much, but they had a good actor who was very added a comic element that they sorely needed going into the last couple of seasons, and so they kept him and boosted his character in the show beyond what we're going to see in the books, and as a result he needed a bigger reward on the show than he is going to be getting in the books, assuming he survives in the books. So yeah, that's where we're at there. I think that the twins is probably still too much for him. Lady Eternal saying, do you think that any of Catelyn's children who survive to the end would eventually form a relationship, whether merely a political alliance or a closer familial relationship with Edmure's child with Rosalind Frey? Or do you think that they would be unable to separate the existence of that child from the events that led to its conception, the Red Wedding, etc.? This is one of those things that I think we will end up not knowing, because George R. R. Martin is not going to, I'm almost certain, he's not going to do the 20 years later kind of thing. He is going to end the story when he feels the story ends. There'll be a few hints. We'll see if, how the new world is being set up, but we're not going to learn about, we're not going to see the story of what happens for the next 20 years. So a newborn baby, are any of the Stark going to be forming a bond with this newborn child? We will not be told. I think that they could, for the reason that which Starks are around is going to be the answer. I think Arya is not going to hang around. Jon, I think, is not going to hang around. Rickon is, I think, not long for this world. Bran is going to be as Bran is going to be, and basically we're just left with Sansa. Will Sansa be able to form a positive relationship with what would he be, a cousin? Yes. I think she's going to be a pragmatic politician by this point. And if, as appears to be the case, Edmure loves this child, then I think that she will form a bond with them, not a close one, but one of political necessity, perhaps. I've got about 3 or 4 more questions now, and then I'm going to come back to the chat. So now is a good time to drop any more questions into the chat. Henning J says, is it intentional that weaker houses or weaker great houses also appear to have weaker house sigils, like the unimpressive trout, the Tullys, or the soft rose for the Tyrells, as opposed to dragons, lions, and wolves? And connected with this, Henning also asked what my opinion is, George R. R. Martin assigning some Muppet Show names to historic Tully family members. For those who are unaware, this is something that George R. R. Martin seems to get no end of amusement from, is by dropping some funny names into the old family trees. And there is a Kermit Tully, there is an Elmo Tully, and an Oscar Tully. So I think, can we read much into this? Well, on the sigils, probably we can. I think he's sort of trying to tell us a bit about the character of the house. I think when the Queen of Thorns, Helena Tyrell, goes off on that rant about how the Tyrells' words and the sigil aren't that impressive compared to others, I think that shows that George R. R. Martin is aware of this. He's clearly aware that you have different houses showing what they are about. The rose is because this is they're not about warfare. The Tyrells, they're about living in the most lush and pleasant part of the Seven Kingdoms, and the Tullys, they are about the river, and it's not about they're not about carving out. They were never the kings, as we've been already establishing, so it's not about trying to threaten other people. The Baratheons, ours is the fury, is clearly trying to threaten people. Similarly, you get the Lannisters, who seem to be very aware of what their words are, to the extent of actually creating a new unofficial set of house words that a Lannister always pays their debt. The dragons, that is just an expression of who they see that they are, and then the Starks are very clearly they're all about ancient links to the north, so and winter. So it's a reflection of what the house is about, and that plays across to how strong the house is in the present. So yes is the short answer. As for him with his wordplay and coming up with Kermit and Elmo and all the rest of it, I think this is just it's his sense of humor. I think the fact that he did it in House Tully probably does similar things with like House Frey and a few other places. He tends not to do this with the houses which are the ones that are hugely important historically, like the sort of the Targaryens and the Starks. He tends not to play those silly games there. He picks on houses where their history is not the most important thing about them. So that, I think, is what we can read into it. His sense of humor, but also what he thinks, which ancient houses he thinks are actually, it's important for us to be noting the name. So with the Starks, the obvious thing is the repeated Brandon all the way through. That's a thing that he is particularly aware of himself, to the extent to which that he sort of raised it in interviews, not just been asked about it. He's raised it as an issue, the fact that he deliberately chose to do that. Slight digression, but that's I think the short answer is yes, he's very aware, and yes, I think it is an indicator that they're not one of these central or more powerful houses. Anime lover Nicole, what will happen to the Riverlands when the books are done? Will the Tullys rule over them with Edmure and Riverrun or some other personal house? I think so. I think that's where we're going to end up. But the world is going to look very different. Because if we do end up with the Weirwood Networks / Bran being in control, then actually whether the Tullys are in Riverrun is not the most important thing. So yes, they probably will do. They will be there because the thing that does strike true about that really quite weird Great Council they had in season 8 was the fact that the house which held the balance of power in that were the Starks. I worked it out at the time. I can't remember how many people they had there in that thing on the show. I think it was something like 15. But when you added it up, you saw that they had 3 or 4 Starks, plus the best friend of a Stark, plus somebody who'd sworn their sword to a Stark, plus somebody who had been Hand of the King to a Stark. I mean, it was you go down through the list and go, hang on a moment. The amount of Starks and Stark loyalists outnumber the rest. So, of course, they got to decide who goes where. So the Starks will end up being very powerful at the end of all of this. And so the Starks will get to decide, as much as anyone else, who is in charge. And given their historic links across to the Tullys, then I think that it's probably a safe bet. The Tullys will retain their place as being the preeminent house in the Riverlands, and that means Edmure, if he survives, and I suspect he probably will be the ruling lord in Riverrun. And Diego Godoy, last question from my patrons, saying, "Hola, Robert. Apologies for the non-Tully question, but I saw the Westeros map yesterday and had to ask this. If you look at the map in the east side of Westeros and the west side of Essos, their shapes sort of match. Disputed lands with the Sea of Dawn, Griffin's Roost with the Sea of Myr. Are you aware of any tectonic plates or continental movements, theories, and legends in a Song of Ice and Fire world, analog to Pangaea in our world? It would be amazing if George R. R. Martin deliberately constructed this and could be connected to the Doom of Valyria, since seismology and volcanic activity are often related." So I had a very quick check back in the World of Ice and Fire, just in case I missed anything. But there isn't this theory of Pangaea, at least I haven't seen it there in the official records. Clearly they were connected to the two continents, were connected, and I think it is not coincidental that the two continents do seem to sort of match up. I think that's as much George R. R. Martin being aware of the way that the worlds work. And so, yes, I suspect they probably were one big continent millennia ago, or whatever. So no, I don't think it's important for the plot, but yes, it kind of makes sense, and I think this is just a little bit of world building on his part. So that, I think, that was the last question from my patrons. Let's go for let's have a quick flick through the chat. Kalnitsky saying the Doom was only 400 years before. Yeah, so I absolutely. So the Doom of Valyria was nothing to do with where the continents are, but I think what Diego was trying to say was that the presence of volcanic activity, which is what is clearly there, is perhaps an indicator of tectonic plates and things shifting. And clearly the Doom of Valyria did shift continents, or change the shape of continents at the very least. Okay, so that is that one. John H. saying John Martin had to throw most of the Essos map together in a rush to finish the World of Ice and Fire. Yes, that was more the eastern half of it. I think the western half with the Free Cities End, he was reasonably settled on. Christian having a quick flick through. Andrew K saying, "Love how George R. R. Martin gave Targaryen names to some phrase. So ridiculous, and they were proper awful. Looking at the Frey versions, Rhaegar Frey to Rhaegar Targ. Yep, so he does that. So there are, and also when I was looking through, I noticed that there was a common Tully, I think, as well, which is, so George R. R. Martin has dropped some of the names, the traditional names we might think, from one house into other houses every now and then, just to sort of mix things up a little bit. Bezad Goldenhand saying, "Do you think it's possible that Rob named Cat as his successor, since Cat said that she got tricked and George R. R. Martin is not confirming that Jon was the successor?" I would have to have another look at that to see when she's saying she got tricked. George R. Martin is not confirming that Jon was a successor, and we do not read. This is the crucial point, and this is what I was going through when I was talking about the Learned Hands podcast that I was talking to, the video released yesterday. The crucial thing is that we do not know what is in the will. The clear implication from that conversation between Rob and Catelyn is that he was going to legitimize Jon, because making sort of Cat his heir is not actually, that's not going to help things in the long run for House Stark, because if, as he suspected, all of the other Starks were dead, then she is probably she would then, I don't know the exact age she's at, but she's starting to reach the point where her childbearing years may be coming to an end soon, and obviously her husband's now died, so she'd have to remarry. she may well not have any more children, so that would actually not help things in the long run. John, as the successor, would potentially allow for there to be more children following on from that and reestablish the Starks in the long run. So the clear implication of all of that does seem to be that it should be him. But the provisions of it are very important, because does it say, I legitimize Jon Snow? Does it say, I legitimize Jon Snow and announce him as my heir as King of the North? Does he say, I legitimize my half-brother? In which case, the moment it becomes apparent that Jon Snow is not his half-brother, does that make the will defunct? Does it say, because Bran and Rickon are both dead, I therefore legitimize Jon? If so, is this, he clearly wrote this on the basis of bad information, and when Bran and Rickon reappear, does this suddenly make the will legally null and void? There are lots of different layers to this, so any kind of speculation we have about what might be in that will, it's actually down to a matter of fine detail, and fundamentally it will come down again and again and again to people will believe and follow what they want to believe and follow. George R. R. Martin, it's the same as with prophecies, it's the same with everything. It matters less the actual truth and fact than what people believe. So it will matter that if people rally around this idea that Jon should be King of the North, that is more than whether technically, legally, that's what Rob wanted. So the will be important, but it will be important more as a thing that people rally around rather than the technical detail. Cloaked One, thank you so much, saying, who do you think would have won in the fight between Jaime and Brynden Blackfish if Brynden had accepted his challenge? My money is on the Blackfish. Yeah, well, with just one hand, Jaime, then yes, definitely. The Blackfish, he might have been getting on in age, but Jaime, with one hand, the wrong hand, he had been training to fight with it, but I think somebody as good a fighter as the Blackfish would have won that one. As a younger man, then I suspect that Jaime would. Jaime was a very, very fine fighter in his time, and I suspect that if he could use his hand that he lost, then he would definitely have beaten him. So that's there. And the Unspun Yarn, thank you so much. Super chat saying, no question, just saying thank you for all of the great analysis. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. So I think that is that. So thank you so much, everyone, for that. I've really enjoyed this. House Tully is one of those houses, as I said at the beginning. It's easy to kind of like dismiss them. They're not one of the main houses, but they're clearly at the center of so much of what is going on, and the most, I will say, complex of interdependencies in anything that's happening in the Winds of Winter is going to be happening in the Riverlands, because there are so many different groups going on, and in a relatively small area, each of those groups could meet each other at different orders, and that will affect what happens. And right at the heart of all of that is the Tullys, the Tully land, the Tully inheritance, and Lady Stoneheart, of course, as well. So with that, I shall just point, as I always do, a couple of different points on the screen. If you like these kind of live streams, longer discussions on different families and Song of Ice and Fire and the like, then there is going to be a link appearing somewhere around here. If you are interested in supporting the channel, or if you want to get access to some of the benefits that my patrons have, then there's going to be a link appearing somewhere around here. Next week, I think I will probably start looking at the religions of Westeros. Maybe I'm going to start with the Red Priests and R'hllor next time around. So tune in next week if you're interested in that. Till then, thank you so much for the fantastic questions and great chat. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.